Do you guys know the movie Whiplash? The movie about Miles Teller, the main character, who's like, I want to be one of the greatest drummers ever. And his guy who's training him, J. Jonah Jameson, is super intense, right? In this movie, which I just watched recently, by the way, very good movie, really good. I've totally been missing out. In the movie, Miles Teller, after developing this goal and after, kind of being like, I gotta up the stakes, I gotta become even better than I am now, he does this thing, right, where he kind of locks himself in this room and just keeps on drumming, right? There's one of those classic movie montages where he's just waking up at 4 a.m., hitting his alarm clock, and he's like, I'm going to be one of the greats, and he just does not stop drumming all day, right? Very classic movie thing. Very classic movie trope. I enjoyed that movie a ton, especially because it's rare to see something about that in the arts, right? Usually being one of the greats is reserved for something along the lines of sports or maybe even, like a political thriller or something like that. It's very rare to see it about art, I think. So I really appreciate the movie, but there was one thing that I really didn't like, and that's that Miles Teller locks himself in a room to become the greatest drummer of all time. And this is no diss towards the movie Whiplash. I think it did a great job at what it was setting out to do. I really did. I don't want this to be misinterpreted at all. But I'm using this as sort of a springboard to jump off into a larger point about art. The fact that in the real world, I think, and this is just my opinion, that Miles Teller probably would have found more inspiration in living a full life, maybe traveling somewhere else to learn how to drum, maybe experiencing a bad breakup. Actually, it's funny, he experiences a breakup in the middle of the movie. He breaks up with this girl because he wants to be one of the greatest drummers of all time, and I think this, at this point, is when I was like, this is a huge missed opportunity in this movie, because I believe that, instead of using this, him breaking up with Supergirl, the actor that plays Supergirl, whose name escapes me, instead of using that just to demonstrate, look how locked in this guy is, look how cool he is, and wanting to become the biggest drummer ever, I think they could have used it to show how much he's learning and how much he's incorporating into the drumming from the life he lives around him. I think if somebody actually had this goal, they'd be incorporating everything in their life to it. He would hear the rhythm in the bus wheels moving, not just study the music in front of him. This is something that I always have believed about art, that if you really lock in on what you're doing, right? Not lock in the sense of like the dumb TikTok edits of like, you need to wake up at 4 a.m. tomorrow and work harder than the competition. I think that's bullshit. I really do. I don't think that's how productivity works. But if you lock in as in you really like love what you're doing and you're thinking about it 24/7, you will discover the rhythm of these drums in everything. And I think that's what the movie misses. And this is springboarding off into a second conversation that I believe is a really important lesson for all artists to learn, all people to learn in general. But I think I'm primarily somebody who deals in art, right? So I think it only makes sense that I'm going to talk about this from that lens. Is that when it comes to creating things, it's really important that your lessons that you learn lack scale, And this is a very imperfect way to put this point. So I'm going to try and describe it over the course of this episode, but it's definitely one of those things I've always been avoiding coming to talk about on Paint and Talk, because I do feel it's a little bit harder to broach as a subject, maybe a little above my pay grade. Maybe I don't think I'm quite the messenger I wish I was for this, but give it a whirl either way. I think when it comes to having your lessons lack scale, what do I mean by that? I mean, I hate that I just did that. I hate when I ask myself a question to answer. I think that, for an example, Miles Teller is learning the drums in this movie. When he's learning a lesson about tempo, right? Something like that. I think you could show so much more about him learning this lesson in so many other ways than just practicing these drums. I think it's actually vastly unrealistic to have somebody lock themselves in a room until they get something right. That's not how anything really works, right? Why didn't he learn the tempo from, actually I don't want to spoil that scene in the movie, because I don't know how taboo it is to spoil Whiplash. Some movies you can spoil, right? Like if I'm like Thanos snaps at the end of Infinity War, everyone's like, duh. But if I was like, this thing happens in Whiplash, I could have a whole crowd of people trying to burn my house down tomorrow. Anyways, back on track here. Let's say that you are learning something in science class, right? Let's say you're learning how atoms work, or let's say you're learning something in physics. I think there's a great opportunity to be had in taking that lesson and trying to apply it to something completely unrelated. In fact, I think that you can learn so much more, and this is what I mean by having lessons lack scale, right? I think that taking a lesson like that, right? If you're learning how atoms work, if you're learning something about physics, usually, and logic would dictate, this is a lesson about physics. This is only going to be applicable in physics. I think if you take that lesson and think in both an abstract and in a material sense, how can I apply this, right? Let's say you're learning about the atom. I'm using this as an example, not because it's a great example, because the atom is one of the few things I know enough about to talk about it on YouTube. Anyways, let's say you're learning about it. I believe that there's a very straightforward sense that I would be like, let's think about how we could take this concept and incorporate it. Maybe I take it into a sense of a painting. How do I take the idea of an atom and put it into a painting? I could look at the structure and be like, let's copy this structure in a painting. And that's one very direct sense. Maybe I'm writing a story and I take the way that atoms work together and I have that be how the aliens work together on a sci-fi planet. You know, something like that. Everybody lives in a little bubble and all those little bubbles are connected. Obviously, these are not the best examples. These probably wouldn't be the best stories, but more ideas are coming out of this one lesson than would otherwise. I think even better, this works if you put it into an abstract sense, right? And maybe, I think this is where I really am a big believer in this, right? If I take the concept of an atom that I'm learning about, and I'm like, okay, this concept of a very small unit, the smallest unit of all, working together to make something larger. And I break that down. Oh, that's kind of how, like, you know, the elements of a painting work together to make one overall concrete image. All these things, there is so much more to be learned from an atom than just a scientific lesson. I don't think that this is groundbreaking, right? I'm not pitching this because I think this is some, you know, I'm not trying to do of like this is my secret to success. No, I'm not that successful of a guy, and honestly, those were some pretty bad ideas I just threw out there. However, I'm a big believer in this. Not because it's led to these insane results in my life, at least not that I can think of off the top of my dome, but more so because I think that's how art works. A couple days ago, I did a paint talk on how art has this insane ability to make the personal super universal, right? If art works that way, and it has this ability to take a very personal story and transform it into something universal, I believe that in making art, it's almost a necessity to do the inverse, to take the universal and make it personal. Maybe this is slightly narcissistic even, to look at the world around you and say, how can I internalize this and put it into a creation? Maybe it is. Honestly, yeah, no, I think I could say it is. It definitely is. A little bit self-centered, a lot of it self-centered even, but I don't think that makes it any less useful. You know, if art is to put yourself into this thing that is able to be opened up by everybody and explode into the world around them, then to create art can just as easily be to take the world around you, put it into yourself, and make something out of it. I also think that, and I probably should have led with this to be honest, because it'd be much better than that atom example, this is why I love reading philosophy so much, because I think that, like, to take a philosophy and approach it in art is one of the most interesting things, right? And I'm not really advocating here that, like, this is some cerebral thing. I really don't want to come off that way, even though I'm sure it will to many people. I'm more so saying, like, we often, the way we're taught about the world, I feel like, is to put these walls up in between things. Like, this is science over here, this is philosophy over here, this is art over here. And this leads people to think a lot of things about art that I don't think are true, you know? So many people are like, to teach art, is just teach color theory, how to use a brush, and that's it. That's literally all you can teach. Maybe some anatomy, maybe some perspective, you know, that's all art is. And then to teach philosophy is to teach how you know, what Kant thought about this, and what Camus thought about that, and what Plato thought about this, right? And then to teach science is to teach just how the atom works. And I think that, again, I'm not saying that there's some cerebral truth to be found in taking the atom and trying to apply it to art. I'm saying, though, that I think there's a lot to be gained by breaking down the walls between this, you know? You can paint like an existentialist versus somebody who believes in almost a, let's go with an example of, you believe in a very Abrahamic religion. You believe in a moralistic God. So you believe that there are objective morals and God set them up, right? Let's say you paint like that. You would probably say that then there is an objective standard of what good art looks like, and every stroke you put down would be defined by that. Versus if you paint like somebody who maybe is more existential and you don't think every stroke matters, you just think it matters if they align with you as a person. Those are two different ways to paint that are somewhat in line with the two philosophies that would have never come out that way anyways. These aren't things that you consciously think when you're doing it, right? I actually think it's interesting the fact that, like, as philosophy develops in different ways, you see art develop alongside of it, and that's a historical thing for sure. But these are implicit things that can be seen in art. And I think taking the world around you and putting it into it is a really great thing to do for that reason. So many of the smartest people I know, people that are way smarter than me, have this ability to take the humanities and science and just like fuse them together. And that's what we should be doing, I think. I'm not smart enough to do that. I'm terrible at science. You saw my atom example. I mean, that thing did not work at all. But if I could, I think it'd be better, and I wish I could. And I try to. I'll never really be at the level of a lot of my friends. They're much smarter than me, but I admire that. I think it's great. If you go back to how philosophy worked in like Greek times, they didn't have science and philosophy. They just had philosophy, but they were doing science. Aristotle came up with a great deal of biology because back then, everything was everything. You were just a biologist, and you know, Plato is a great example of this. Plato looked at geometry and went, this must be how the whole world works in terms of morality too. Like, now there's like a perfect square in geometry, right? What's it called again? I don't know, but you know what I mean. There's the perfect square. You can imagine it. There's a perfect triangle with the three angles and a perfect circle. Plato looked at that and he was like, oh, there must be a perfect version of everything then. There must be a perfect tree. There must be a perfect idea of morality. And that's how he came with his world of forms. That's awesome. Wrong, but awesome. And you can do that. If you remove the guardrails, I think there's so much to be found in that. This is the painting. Another deconstructed. I like the colors. This was just how I was feeling today. Please forgive me, guys. I'm still getting back into the swing of recording these. You know, it's been a good couple days since I recorded a paint talk, unfortunately, so not my best work today. Probably should have chosen this subject for a day when I was a little bit more practiced, but hey, get what you get. Don't be upset. Is that what they told me in pre-K? Either way, I'll be back tomorrow with an even better paint talk than today, guys, I promise. Sorry again about that, and hopefully this wasn't too bad. Let me know, what do you think about today's topic? And until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint Talk episode 162. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.